Good afternoon. I'm Anita Huberman, CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade. Thank you for virtually attending the Surrey Digital Human Resources Town Hall. It's important to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Kwantlen Katzie Semiahmoo and Tawasin First Nations. Just a couple of instructions and comments before we begin. Number one, this session is being recorded. The link will be sent to you after the session is over, as well as the facilitator contact information and a post-meeting survey will be sent to you. All attendees are muted. Number two, the webinar or the town hall format. So at the Surrey Board of Trade in this very uncertain time, the past 2 weeks, we've been getting a lot of questions daily from our members, trying to navigate HR and employment law issues. We put together this afternoon a list of our top 10 member questions, which our facilitators will answer. There's a lot to cover in 1 hour with these 10 questions. If there is time remaining, we'll take questions live from the chat function. So type in your questions. For any specific questions that you have to your specific industry, please email me, anita@businessinsurrey.com. And my particulars will be indicated in the chat room shortly, and I'll get the answer for you. And if we have time, we will go to the chat room and respond to your questions as best as we can. And ladies and gentlemen, believe me, this is not going to be the last town hall focused on human resource issues. It will be ongoing. Be mindful that facilitators can't give legal advice in this public format, but will be providing information. This is to help you, your business, your workforce. Item number 3, we want you to visit the Surrey Board of Trade website often, businessinsurrey.com, and more specifically, the COVID-19 emergency portal, because government supports are changing daily. Links are being updated daily. And the Surrey Board of Trade, as best as we can, are updating you. But there are specific questions that you have, and we can address those for you through that portal or by direct communication with the Surrey Board of Trade. And I just wanted to let you know that the Surrey Board of Trade is here for you. We're a not-for-profit as well, and we've had to make some difficult decisions as it relates to our operations. But we participated in and will be participating in the different government programs that have or will be announced. And I want you to know that I, as the leader of the Surrey Board of Trade, as the CEO, have taken care of all of my staff to ensure that we've redeployed all of our staff as it relates to pandemic times, invoking ground zero protocol to help our members, the business community, and communication with all levels of government to ensure that Surrey will continue to be an opportunity city. I want you to know that our advocacy continues in this time. I have daily meetings with the federal government. I sit on the Premier's Economic Recovery Task Force that really is a communication mechanism every Thursday morning for 45 minutes, articulating the gaps on the ground, what's happening on the ground, and also focusing on post-pandemic economic recovery. We need to hear from you in terms of what's happening on the ground, because we have now this direct portal to both the federal and provincial government. We also advocated for a weekly call with the City of Surrey pandemic team to ensure that there's two-way communication. So if there's something happening that the city needs to focus on, let us know, we'll get it done. We have their ear as well. So again, we're all in this together. So let's begin and introduce our panelists. And they're from Surrey, British Columbia. And our first panelist is Mandie LaMontagne. She is the co-founder and partner at the Intueri group. She is a business consultancy specialist working in the areas of succession planning and business transition strategy for small and medium-sized businesses. For the last 7 years, she's focused on working with business owners, partners, and boards to support organizations and help them with their human resource challenges. She brings nearly 25 years of human resources experience. She's a chartered professional in human resources, holding a CPHR designation. She's a member of the Surrey Board of Trade for a number of years. She's a board director and co-chair of our social policy and workforce team. And she's been recognized previously as a nominee for the Surrey Women in Business Awards, a true female leader right here in Surrey. Our second panelist, also a leader in Surrey, is an employment lawyer and founder of Forte Law. Her name is Sara Forte. She and her team of 5 lawyers help workers, unions, and businesses of all sizes solve legal problems at work, from hiring to firing and everything in between. Her team focuses during the pandemic, really advising businesses through labor cost reduction strategies for those who need to downsize, labor continuity and retention for those businesses who need to keep operating, and innovatively, because we all need to be innovative during these times, she has created a specialized package, a flat rate discount for all businesses during this time to roll out labor cost reduction strategies starting at $1,000 for small businesses. Sara and her team have also been very active in providing legal information to the public in these fast-changing times. And through webinars, news media interviews, plain language blogs, really no legalese to make it simple for you. And also, Sara asked me to clarify that the information that she's going to be providing this afternoon is going to be mainly about non-union, provincially regulated organizations who are covered by the Employment Standards Act. So ladies and gentlemen, let's begin with the top 10 human resource questions that we've been getting. Our first question to the panelists is, how should sick days be handled? Sara.
Well, thank you, Anita, and thank you for that amazing introduction that I will also note was literally to the minute of the time in our schedule. So we will all try to be as good as Anita at sticking with our schedule and getting through everything. I'm so happy to be here and just so happy to be talking to Anita and Mandie, who I have known for a long time, and also to many of you in the audience online who I have known and some of you I don't. The question that we got here first is, how should sick days be handled? And this is something Anita's getting a lot, and we're also getting a lot at our office. And so there has been a lot of talk about legal changes in employment law in BC, and there actually haven't been a lot of changes announced. There's a lot of speculation, but one change that has been announced is to sick leave. And so the Employment Standards Act was amended last week, and it had 2 amendments. One was to include a protection for sick leave for illness or injury of 3 days. That has nothing to do with COVID. That's just going to be there forever and is in the law in many other provinces already. And the second amendment, which is specific to COVID, protects a bunch of different leaves. And I'm going to read off what those are because it's not any reason related to COVID is sick days. It's specific. So under the Employment Standards Act, if you're diagnosed with COVID, if you're quarantined or self-isolating pursuant to a government directive, if your employer has told you not to work because they're concerned about you exposing others at work, if you need to provide care to a minor child due to a school or daycare closing, or if you're stuck outside of British Columbia due to travel restrictions. So those particular reasons are now protected leaves. And what that means is, as an employer must allow employees to take time off work for those reasons. They do not have to pay them. They are unpaid leaves. And so that's one change that relates to sick days and how they should be handled. In general, the same rules, other than those that have always applied to sick days, continue to apply. And generally, there's no obligation to provide paid sick time. and that still remains the case, unless you have something in your own policies or employment contracts that promises employees paid sick time. So that is generally how sick time can be handled. I think the other point right now is around medical notes. So certainly there is loosening of medical notes being required by the government, for instance, for sick EI. And so as an employer, I think that now is likely a time to be flexible about that. And certainly if someone's been diagnosed with COVID, is self-isolating or quarantined, it would not be appropriate to ask them for a medical note because they're not to go to their doctor. So that's my answer. Anything to add, Mandie?
There I go with the mute again. Hi, everyone. Sorry. Thinking in my brain. No, I would say that you've covered it off really well. And again, the employer is not obligated to pay for this sick time, and there's a lot of questions back and forth around it. The one point that I do want to focus in on is the requirement for sick notes. So even if your policy right now has a requirement that after 3 days of leave, you have to produce a note, I would encourage employers to be really flexible around this and disregard that, because you're asking them to go to their doctor's office to get a note. At this time, let it be. Let's continue to plank the curve and allow them to self-isolate or to take advantage of a few days away from the office.
Well, Sara and Mandie, a lot of the questions that I've been getting is around a lot of employer anxiety during these times in the future, what it's going to look like. Can an employer force employees to use sick days or vacation days at this time?
That's a question we're also getting frequently, Anita, and I'll maybe start with vacation, just because we've just been talking about sick. So generally speaking, an employer can mandate that an employee take vacation time. And often employers are approaching this right now with the best intentions, I find, and they're just looking for ways to keep paying people. And so if that employee has a vacation bank, that is a win-win situation for the employee to keep getting paid, despite the fact that there's not work to be done. So yes, you can mandate vacation time. The only exceptions to that would be if you have something in your policy or in your contracts that say employees get to choose their vacation time. And of course, we're talking about a non-union environment here. We have a blog on our website literally on that exact question. So I would encourage you to go to fortelaw.ca, can an employer force a vacation time, and just check out some more information on that. Sick time is a little bit different because it is to be used when you're sick. And so if an employer and an employee agreed that they have a sick time bank, and that they're agreeing to use it now, I would say that would be the best approach. The other thing to keep in mind is this is going to end. And when it ends, people are going to come back to work, and they may need access to that sick or vacation time for the balance of the year. So just something to keep in mind as an employer too, if you're sort of pressing out and paying out all the banks, okay, do you want to hold back some of that, or let employees hold back some of that so they can use it when they're back to work, because we've still got, you know, a huge portion of the calendar year left, and hopefully we will be all back to work well before that's over.
Well, really, one of the unexpected realities of COVID-19 is around remote work. And I think even when the virus ends, workplace culture, workplace policies around remote work is going to need to be modified. So can you tell me, Mandie, perhaps, how should remote work be handled? What type of policies should be in place?
Well, thanks, Anita. Big question. Everyone is currently facing this right now, how to handle the transition of a lot of their workforce from the office into some kind of home environment. And I think that it should be handled with consistency, and I think it should be handled with compassion at the outset. You really need to think about how you're going to handle it before just sending everyone home and figuring out the details. So there are a few items that you really need to look at before you push people out the door or ask them to work from home. And one of those would be looking around, what kind of policies do you already have in place around telework, flexible work, or distanced employment? So working from home is not going to be new to everybody. There are many people in the workforce right now who do it on a regular basis. What we're focused on are those who don't, and for whom it will be very new and very challenging. So you also want to look at the employee's capacity to work from home, especially where it's going to be very new. Maybe they work in an environment where they don't have access to a quiet place to work from. Maybe they have other distractions or other disruptions, or maybe they have a family and they need to find ways to work around that. So you want to have some of these conversations with them to figure out, can they accommodate working from home? And if they can, what other tools are they needing to be able to be really successful in the workplace? So is there a way that the employer can provide them with their chair? Some of us like our comfy chairs. Do they need a screen or specific equipment that they could bring from the work site into their home environment to help make that transition a little easier? Is there anything else that they might need in terms of access? So we've gone from dial-up to remote access of some of the networks. And in some cases with the demand right now, we're seeing a bit of a strain on the networks in terms of continuity and access. So what can the employer do to ensure that they have that ongoing access to the tools and resources that they need to be able to do their job effectively? I would also look at considering, encouraging independence and flexibility. So we come to the office and we work a fixed schedule, 9 to 5, 8 to 4, whatever it might be. At home, that can look very different. And so encouraging employees to have some creativity and to have some independence around creating a work schedule that's going to work the best for them. And many people who haven't done this don't know how to set that level of discipline. Right? They work best with a schedule. So help them to create that schedule. What do you do in the morning? What do you do in the afternoon? And encouraging microbursts of both work and rest. Because you can find yourself sitting in front of a computer for hours and hours and hours and go, where did the day go, right? So being mindful of the fact that there are emotional challenges, there are physiological challenges, there are physical challenges that come from working at home or working in a place that is relatively unfamiliar to you. And I think the other piece that I find most important is recognizing that we aren't all going to handle these challenges or these changes in the same way. Some of us are going to slide into working from home like we've done it for years, and others are really going to struggle with how to make it work. Am I doing it right? Do I have access to the people that I've had access to every day? Suddenly I might feel isolated. My anxiety might increase. My emotions might be high and low. And so as an employer, you want to make sure that you establish a checklist or routine so that daily you can be connecting with all of your employees to provide that ongoing encouragement and reinforcement. Also to be making sure that they're getting the work done. So we've sent people home and we've asked them to work from home, but is it feasible?
Yeah.
So checking in, how's it going? Is there anything that we can do to make this better for you? What kind of adjustments need to be made? Maybe you have someone who likes to work in the middle of the night now because that's when the kids are asleep and the house is quiet. Let them know that that's okay, right? As long as you have an understanding of what's expected and what can be done, you'll be a lot better for it.
Thank you. Sarah? Your mute function.
Yeah, unmuting. Mandie, those are great tips. I think you can't communicate enough right now, is what I would say. And from a legal perspective, just important to keep in mind the WorkSafe BC has guidelines on working alone and working from home. I actually noticed yesterday they posted a bunch of new guidelines about safe workplaces in COVID. So if you go to the WorkSafe BC site, you should be able to find that. And within that, there was an embedded link to working from home and working alone. So a couple of things that you need to think about is, as an employer, you still have an obligation to provide a safe workplace. And that workplace has now become that employee's home. There may have been a time where we would have gone and done an inspection of the home office. Well, that's not feasible right now. So you need to think about, okay, how can I make sure that my employees are safe, emotionally and safe ergonomically? And I liked Mandie's idea, and that's certainly what we did at our office. It's like, if you need anything from your office, come one evening, come and get it, take it home. This is not going to be for a week or two. I think that much is clear now, unfortunately. And so it's important to have people be comfortable and not work in ways that's going to result in them injuring their bodies.
Thank you both. There's a lot of fear and anxiety as it relates to COVID-19, a lot of new economic realities for workers. What should employers do? How should they deal with work refusal if that happens?
Mm, that's another really good question. And I think we're seeing a lot more of this. I'm certainly having a lot of these questions come to me. How do we handle this? And in my experience, the refusal to work often comes from one of two places. And it's either from a place of fear and anxiety or from a lack of information. And so my best advice would be, when you're talking to your individual employees, consider the relationship that you have with them. So all of that remains the same. They're still your employee today as they were yesterday. So seek to understand the nature of their concerns. Have one of those deep and meaningful conversations around, help me to understand what is making you uncomfortable about coming to the workplace. Provide them that opportunity to be really clear with you on what is making them feel they need to refuse coming to work. And then ask them what would make it safe for them. They're likely going to identify exactly what needs to change. Whether or not the employer can then accommodate that or make those changes is the next step. Right? But you have to ask the question and involve them in the process so that the outcome is shared by both the employee and the employer, because they both play a role in ongoing maintenance of a health and safety work environment. Pardon me. I'd also review your internal communications, what you've done historically within your culture around communicating work safety items. And what's been posted, what's been presented, what kind of training has been offered, specifically what's been done around COVID, right? Have you increased your cleaning protocols? Have you increased your training? Have you increased meeting with employees to let them know all the different steps and tactics that you're taking as an organization to make it a safe place for them to be and to come to work? And if you haven't done that, step it up. Communicate with them. Share with them exactly what you're doing. And coming back to Sarah's point, it's all about communication. You cannot over communicate exactly what you're doing. So you find yourself repeating, and that's an okay thing, because not everyone is going to remember the entire message the first time you deliver it. So come back again and again and reinforce that. I would also speak to the fact that some people are just normally anxious, right? On the best of days, they have anxieties about coming to work, leaving their house, getting through stressful conversations. That's okay. As an employer, you need to acknowledge that and give them an opportunity to, if they will, discuss it with you, share some of those anxieties, bring up what's bothering them. Maybe they just need an ear and to be heard, and maybe perhaps that will be enough. You might also consider some of the mental health resources available to all of your employees. And some of these are often provided within your employee benefits, right? So the Employee Families and Assistant Program, or other counseling services that might be available to them. An opportunity just for them to speak and be heard. And sometimes that can resolve their work refusal. However, there is a legal side to it, which I'm sure that Sarah can talk to.
And interesting, thinking about the benefits angle, Mandie, that you mentioned, just before I get too far into the legal bit, is that your employees should still have benefits in place if they're working full time. And I think that there are going to be many people who are going to become ill because of the stress of all of this, who may have been the people who were having difficulty coping before. And just a reminder that those benefits programs, short-term disability, long-term disability, if you have those, EFAP, are all still there and in place. I think sometimes we feel like everything has changed. And so we're looking for something new or some announcement from the government, but like all the stuff that we had already is still there and still available to be used. So I think that's a really good point to think about. Work refusals, this is something that's coming up at questions at my office on a daily basis. And to me, the line between I just feel uncomfortable versus employer, you're not complying with the guidelines that are coming out, that to me is a distinct line that employers have a right to push on. So if you have employees that have a job that requires them to be at work, and I'll just use grocery right now because everybody's loving our grocery workers and they're still there showing up day after day. So if you're a cashier at a grocery store, you can't work remotely. They're not fortunate enough to have those kinds of jobs right now. So they have to come to do their job. And if those grocery workers or similar people who are in those kind of hands-on direct contact jobs are feeling uncomfortable, that's not enough for them to stop coming to work. Just like in any other situation, people are required to come to work. The line is where there are safety issues. And again, I'll just refer back to those WorkSafe guidelines. They literally came out yesterday. It's in plain language. It has a section for employees and a section for employers. And it's things to look at to make sure that your workplace is safe. So I think those kinds of third-party documents are really helpful even to share with your employees if they're concerned. It's like, hey, here's what we're looking at, and we're doing all these things. But on refusal to work if it's discomfort, and that's the only reason, so it's not because I have kids at home I need to take care of or because I'm quarantined, it's just, I just plain don't feel comfortable being around other people right now. Unless there's something more than that, that's not something that you have to accommodate as an employer.
And that's going to be a common question in the forthcoming future, I expect. I just wanted to mention at this time that for those Surrey Board of Trade members that are participating in the Chamber of Commerce Group Insurance Plan and have their employees with those benefit plans, there's a short-term disability option that they can take advantage of instead of going on EI. That might be an opportunity for you to explore, and we can provide more information after the session is over. My next question to the panelists is, if an employee contracts COVID-19, are they eligible for workers' compensation benefits?
On the notion of benefits, I'll tackle this one first. I would say that WorkSafe has been really good about publishing a lot of information as it relates to what is appropriate, where employees are eligible for compensation and for benefits. And they have very clear guidelines that are available. So I would encourage everyone to visit their site, whether you're an employer or an employee, or simply looking for more information to understand the structure. The nature of the workers' compensation benefit is really designed to provide compensation that's related to illness or injury that is as a direct result of employment. And so with COVID, you can contract, you can become exposed to that almost anywhere. It's generally and widely available out in the public. And so I would say, and I'm not an adjudicator with WorkSafe, but I would say that it would be very difficult for an employee to prove or to provide information that says that I contracted COVID directly in the workplace, at the workplace, or as a result of my employment. That being said, some of the essential services and the healthcare, you might have a different argument for that. And so for the general public, for the general workplace, I would say that they would be not covered as it relates to a work-related illness or injury, specifically for COVID. And if Sarah can jump in.
Mandie. Yeah, I think that's the key, is where you ended there. It's WorkSafe is for work-related illnesses or injuries. So it's things that you have, you have been injured or become ill because of your work or due to exposure at work. So that's going to be the key. If you pick up COVID in your day-to-day life, that wouldn't be something that normally WorkSafe would cover, just like if you got injured or any other illness somewhere other than at work. Coming back, and I feel like we're repeating this plug for the Chamber's plan. If you do have short-term disability or long-term disability coverage, though, those generally don't turn on whether you became ill or injured at work or elsewhere. And so if you're unable to work, those are definitely plans to look into, irregardless of whether you got COVID at work or somewhere else.
Another question that I've been getting most recently from members and just the general business community is, what happens if a workplace has to temporarily close because of the virus? What are they supposed to do?
This is almost a double-barreled. Maybe Sarah, I'll take point on this one. I think that before you make the decision to close, which is a huge decision, unless you've been government mandated to do so, you really want to understand all of your options. And so you want to look at measures which are going to address your employees. How are you going to handle the disbursement of those individuals? Are they going to be working from home? Are you facing a layoff? Are you making application for maybe a subsidy? and looking at different alternative working arrangements. You want to make sure that you've covered off all of the humans, how you're handling them for the foreseeable future, because once you close that business, that's a very distinct and final line. You also want to look at measures to address the physical location. And I'm not an operations expert, but I would say that looking at how you're going to be handling inventory or equipment or addressing daily operations like the mail, the courier, deliveries, would also be items on your checklist that you really need to consider. How are they going to be handled in your absence? Along with the insurance, what happens if you are not on site? Does it affect the insurance that you have for that location or locations? Are you covered in the event of a robbery or a break-in or fire, etc.? Communication, right? How are you communicating this closure to all of the affected stakeholders, employees, customers, visitors, individuals within the neighborhood who might pass by if you're a brick and mortar location? Do you have clearly articulated signage as to why you're closed and where they might go for other resources, right? And do you need security? Will you need to have somebody on site to ensure the safety of your premises for the duration that it's closed? So these would be just some of the first questions that would come to mind for me.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't envy any organization that's in this position. And I know it's so sad that there are so many that are currently looking at this. I agree with everything Mandie just said. And there's many things on that list that I hadn't even thought about, definitely not in the legal bucket. But I think looking at all the options is something that I'll echo. So when this crisis began, I was talking a lot about layoffs. And that was sort of the go-to, right? Are we going to be laying people off? What are layoffs going to look like? Well, I've completely changed the way I'm looking at that to labor cost reduction strategies, of which layoff is one of many. And the options seem to be increasing. I mean, I don't know, Anita's keeping track of these government updates better than anyone, but it feels like daily, you know, there's new information, there's new offerings, there's more information about last week's offerings. And so there's certainly more, I would say there are absolutely more options now to reduce labor costs than there ever have been for a business, because there's these government programs that have come out in addition to all the things that we could do before. So before you decide to close and lay everyone off, I would look at what those options are. You know, I'm inviting my clients too to come back to their values and their mission as an organization. And when they're deciding, you know, when and how to close or whether to pivot and how they might pivot, you know, those are the places to look to, and this is your chance to be consistent with your organizational culture and values. One sort of, I guess, I'll call it a fairly nerdy legal point that all the employment lawyers are debating. If you're friends with employment lawyers on Twitter, and I have a lot of those, and you can be mine if you want to connect with me on Twitter. There is this huge discussion right now happening about what I refer to as this dusty old section of the Employment Standards Act, and it's section 65(1)(d), if anyone else is as nerdy as I am. And if you look it up on the Employment Standards Branch website, you'll see that it's a section that deals with a number of things, but sub D is where an employer where an employment contract has become impossible to perform due to unforeseen event or circumstance, there is no obligation to provide severance pay. And so this is essentially what in legal terms is called frustration of contract. So it's where sort of, you know, the employees over here, employers over here, so I work, I pay, well, something's come in between that means that those two things can't meet together anymore. And that's frustration of contract. And that's what this section is about. There are some employment lawyers who are suggesting this would apply very broadly right now and that many employers would not have to provide any severance pay. And I'm bringing it up now because we're talking about a closure. So if you're closing, I think if you are the kind of industry, and Mandie references, like if you're being ordered to close, I think you have much more likelihood of being able to resort to that kind of protection of impossibility. Impossibility is a high standard. But if you're slowing down or you're anticipating a slowdown and you're sort of laying people off incrementally, I think you're going to have a lot harder time saying that it's impossible to close, impossible to continue the contracts. So when I'm thinking about closure and whether I'm going to close or what closing means, I think for me that particular piece of the Employment Standards Act is part of the consideration.
Well, the past 2 weeks, small and medium-sized businesses, even large businesses, they've had to make very difficult decisions to lay off people. The negotiation between employer and employee is always very complex, even under the best of circumstances. But one common question that I've been getting is, and you've kind of addressed it a little bit, but if you can, panelists, just expand upon it a little bit more, is are you obligated as an employer to provide severance pay?
I'm going to give Mandie first shot in this, and then I'll maybe come in and back clean up for you, Mandie. I've got a lot to say about this topic, so this is where I'm going to go. Anita might have to give me the hook and move on to the next question. So go ahead, Mandie.
Absolutely, it's okay. It's a back and forth. I'm enjoying this. Again, the COVID crisis is really forcing a lot of businesses to look at their planning, to look and understand how they respond to these critical events. So whether it's a fire, an earthquake, a flood, an act of God, they're all being forced to look at how have we planned for this and what are we going to do? And so my advice is always really dig in and understand how you planned to respond to this. If you have a plan in place, let's dust it off and let's follow it. If you don't, let's dig in and spend just as much time understanding what your options are to keep employees working before you look at how to let them go. And you need to understand your options, because if you handle it correctly, you may not have to pay severance pay. If you handle it incorrectly, you probably will. And so Sara will definitely go into details on this, but I would say that a helpful approach is really looking at ways to understand how you can keep employees working. So are they working from home? Are you scheduling them just differently so that you can accommodate social distancing protocols? Are you looking at applying for a wage subsidy? Are you looking at the work share program and modifying the way work is done, or with what frequency or how many hours it's being done? So taking advantage of a lot of the programs that are available to you in advance of making a decision to either lay off or to terminate employment. Once you've exhausted all of those options, you also want to look at what your employment agreements, if you have them, what they say. Where are you able to move, and what are your options within those? I'm about to send this flying over.
All right, Sara. Here it comes.
Go along.
It's interesting. I got it. I was talking to a lawyer the other day, commercial lawyer, and we were talking about how these situations aren't addressed in a lot of people's contracts, whether they be employment contracts or otherwise, and just how unforeseen this truly was for so many. And he was thinking about drafting an alien invasion clause in his contracts, because we were trying to think of what's the next completely unforeseeable thing that we could think of that might happen and we should be putting in our contract. So again, lawyer humor is not for everyone, but we're working on alien invasion clauses next. So severance pay, this is a really great question, and this is something I'm spending a lot of time talking about. So if you are temporarily laying off your workers, so whether that's because you're closing or because you just are downsizing and reducing your numbers, that generally will give the employee a right to claim severance pay. And how does that work? Well, if it's under the Employment Standards Act, again, there's language that actually says a temporary layoff will generally be considered a termination. There are 3 exceptions though. One is if you're in an industry where temporary layoffs are very common. So there's some industries where that's just a routine part of business, maybe seasonal type industries. So there may be more ability to do layoffs because it's just sort of understood to be part of the deal that you're not going to have full-time year-round employment. The second situation is if it's in your contract. So if you had the foresight to put in a temporary layoff clause into your contract, I can tell you they'll be in all contracts going forward, but they certainly weren't in that many in my experience going back the last 16 years. So if your contract says you can temporarily lay people off, then you may have the ability to do that without attracting severance pay liability as well. So as Mandie said, look at your contracts. We've had some clients who have been pleasantly surprised that they did have something in there. And we've had a lot of clients who have discovered that they don't have anything or don't have contracts at all in place. So the third exception to a temporary layoff being a termination which results in severance pay is if the employee agrees. So there's this, I think, is third category is where most of the action is happening right now. In my experience, most employees are agreeing right now to temporary layoffs, hoping that they're short term, looking at the government offerings that are available. They are maybe eligible for EI, and really, wanting to support the business so that they'll have something to come back to when this is all over. And so that's the third category. And that's, so if you you say to your employees, so I say, Mandie, I'm really sorry, we've had this big slowdown and I'm going to have to lay you off temporarily. Here's the letter, have a look at it. I mean, I'm doing this remotely probably, so I'm emailing it to you. And if you're comfortable with that, if you could just sign it and send it back, and hopefully we'll have you back soon. And so then Mandie would, if she can, insert a digital signature. If not, she could actually just email me back and say, I agree. You don't have to have it in like an actual physical signature. So that's the third way you can avoid severance pay liability. If the employee does not agree, what does that mean? This is kind of like almost a ridiculous statement. Like, how can you not agree to a layoff? Like, if there's no work, there's no work. And that's true in the sense that if they're not agreeing, that essentially that means they're saying, I'm not agreeing to be temporarily laid off. You have fired me, and so pay me my severance pay. So that is their option, is to demand that in the alternative. Whether this, again, impossible to complete the contract due to unforeseen circumstances might come into play. That's possible in some circumstances, but most employees would be on solid ground to say, I want my severance pay. How much is severance pay is another really big question right now. And severance pay, I mean, to go into that is very individualized, but I'll give you some general parameters. So under the Employment Standards Act, it's 0 to 8 weeks, and that depends only on how long they've been there. And so that's Section 63 of the Employment Standards Act. That's something you can look at. If you have an employment contract, your employment contract may say this is what you get on termination of an employment. If that contract is valid, then that might be binding. The third circumstance is if you don't have a valid contract, or the contract doesn't address termination pay in an appropriate way, then you're stuck with the common law, which is basically judges coming in and saying how much is owed, which is based on the employee's age, their length of service, the nature of their job, and availability of alternative employment. And it's interesting when you think of those factors right now, because availability of alternative employment, I think, is going to be limited. There are industries that are hiring, but in many industries there's been a sort of complete shuttering and slowdown. So severance pay could be quite extensive. And the other point to just keep in mind, and I'm sure I must be almost getting the hook on this question, but is that temporary layoffs can only be 13 weeks under the Employment Standards Act. And so this whole thing is going to come back again in 13 weeks after if Mandie's agreed to my layoff and signed and returned, and then hopefully she's eligible for EI and she's been collecting it, and then she comes back and we're 13 weeks down the road. Well, if she's come back to work, we're all good and we're back and off rolling. But if I haven't been able to get her back to work, at that point, the layoff converts into a termination and the severance pay entitlement arises then. So that's another, I'm sure, hope we don't get there. Collectively, it's possible the government might look at that again down the road. They did not change this, and they certainly would have had the opportunity to do that when they did the other Employment Standards Act changes. But for now, that 13 weeks is the limit.
Well, we know that government supports, both provincially and federally, are changing almost daily. And trying to keep on top of it all is next near impossible. And the next two questions, question 8 and question 9, I just want to kind of group together around government supports, because really that is the number one question that I've been getting from our members in the business community about how can I access EI, wage subsidy, the new emergency benefit program, if I'm self-employed, on contract, if I'm a not-for-profit, can I access them? And where do I go? What are the touch points? And so what I've been doing, of course, is really utilizing my federal provincial government contacts to answer those questions. But I'm just wondering, from your expertise, both of you, Sara and Mandie, in terms of accessing EI, wage subsidy, the emergency benefit, as it relates to self-employed people, and in general context terms, what advice do you have?
Sure. I mean, Anita, you've got the direct portal to the government. I'm not on those calls, so I know you've got lots of good information about what's changing. I always like to start with like what hasn't changed. So EI is always been there for employees who have been laid off. It is still there for employees who have been laid off. So if you have 700 hours of insurable earnings, that's in the Vancouver region, which would include Surrey, and you have been laid off due to shortage of work, you should be eligible for EI. And from an employer's perspective, you complete the record of employment, you put code A in the reason for issuing the record of employment, you click unknown in the return date, and that's your job as the employer, is to do that record of employment. And so that is, you know, if for folks that are applying for EI, they would go online and access it from Service Canada. So that's one sort of relatively straightforward. There's a lot of things that are known about that. Not that it wouldn't change, and I've heard some rumors there might be some more changes coming down the pipes about EI to address the backlog right now. But as of now, that's still there. That's always been there. And that's something that folks can go ahead and apply for. You need 7 days of no work and no pay to be eligible to receive EI for a layoff. The other programs that we're talking about, the wage subsidy, I think Anita calls it CERB, I've been calling it CURB, it's the CERB, the Emergency Response Benefit. Work sharing is another one I get a lot of questions about, and supplemental insurance benefits. One helpful thing is they're all federal. So they are all offerings of our federal government. Many of them are being streamed through Service Canada. So I get a lot of folks that are asking about CRA, and it's not CRA, it's Service Canada that administers these things. So your first step would be to go on the government's website to take a look. CERB, we're expecting more announcements on. I mean, they may be coming out today. As far as I'm aware, you cannot yet apply for them at all because they haven't opened the portal, and Anita's agreeing with me there. And the wage subsidy, there seems to be more information just coming out daily on that. So I think even by Friday, we'll probably have more information actually on all of these things. So I guess the end of the story, long story, is if we're talking about EI, it's there, it's always been there, it's still there, you can go ahead, you should have everything you need to apply for that. Many of the other programs are still in the works, being the CERB and the wage subsidy. Workshare is open. You can apply for that. The government actually has done a really good job of streamlining that program. And on our website, you can check out, we've got a blog on there that's called Can Workshare Save Your Business? And so take a look at that if you're wondering just like what the heck is Workshare, because even though it's been in existence for a long time, most of us have never heard of it because it was industry specific to specific industries before. And the supplemental unemployment benefit, a sub plan, again, that's something that's available now. You can look at it online. And in my view, sub plans are more like that's something, it's basically a way that you can top up EI. And it's not something employers are required to do. So when we're looking at labor cost reduction strategies, that's something to talk about. But unlike the other programs, you know, it's not going to keep people at work and sort of save you money. It's something you're offering to them if they're off work and on a layoff. I guess my last point I want to make on this is I have been so amazed and just, I don't know, blown away by my employer clients who are frankly ready to turn themselves inside out to try to make sure employees land well on the other side. And so there's a lot of questions about EI eligibility and CERB eligibility, and are my employees going to get this? And one thing I have to sort of back employers up is to say that's actually not that's not within your control. That is programs between the federal government and those individual people. That is not in the control of a company. So your obligation as an employer is to issue a record of employment, fill it out correctly. What you can do to help your workers is fill it out on a timely basis. Don't write anything in the comments box. There's a comments box that just is begging for you to write some kind of comment in it. If you write something in the comments box, it may get flagged for a human to review it. Most EI is done by a computer system. So if there are things that might flag it for a person to look at, then that obviously can result in delay. But other than that, the other things are not within your control. So I really recommend that businesses do not make promises to their employees about what they're going to get, because you don't have control over that. And if you make those kinds of promises to employees, you might be held responsible if it doesn't work out in the end. So, give them the government website for sure. That's okay to do, but just don't be saying, oh yes, you're definitely going to get EI, or certainly you're going to get the CERB, because there's a lot of unknowns about that, and it's not within your control.
In the remaining 6 minutes that we have, I just wanted to mention that, again, if you have any specific questions, whether it's human resources related or not, if it's related to supply chains, please contact the Surrey Board of Trade. A lot of the information that Sara and Mandie are talking about, and their members as well, so please feel free to reach out to them. Their contact information will be sent to you, but do check businessinsurrey.com, our emergency portal for COVID-19. Those links are being updated every single day. And the Board of Trade staff will respond to your questions as well. And we have some in the chat room. We'll get those answers to you in short time. But any final remarks, Mandie?
One small final remark. I would say for the self-employed, big question is, I'm not an employee, I'm self-employed, I might be a contractor. Depending on how you categorize it, depending on how you've handled things, you may be eligible for EI benefits. And so if you've been paying in as an independent contractor or a self-employed individual, if you've been paying into the EI program, then you're going to have the ability to potentially make an application like anyone else who is an employee under that same situation. If you're not, or you haven't been participating in one of those EI contribution programs, then you're going to want to look to the CERB for potential access to benefits that might be able to support you through this.
Sorry, go ahead, Mandie.
No.
So I guess in terms of closing comments for me, one, I'm just kind of quickly scrolling through the chat, and I have to say I love that people are providing information as well as asking questions in there. So you're a very self-sufficient audience. And I think for me, that goes to one of the questions, that one of the final points I would leave with you is, go to good sources for information. There is so much floating around on social media, on the news media, and not all of it is completely accurate. I think that it's important to sort of monitor the news and watch social media for updates. But when you get to the point of thinking, does this apply to me? You need to go to the source, because that's where the solid information is. And so my go-to sources right now are for employment standards. The Ministry of Labor, BC Ministry of Labor Employment Standards branch has a website, and they are posting lots of information, for instance, about these new protected leaves. WorkSafe BC has just added a whole bunch more information, but great website to go to. Again, rather than speculation, it's actual information. The government website, so definitely Service Canada and the federal government. And so in the same way, I see sometimes people are posting on, Facebook mom groups that I'm on about what are the health recommendations. It's like, well, you know, Bonnie Henry is the best person to listen to if you want to know what the health recommendations are. So go to the source, and other good sources are Surrey Board of Trade. I have to put a plug in because I know Anita has been just absolutely working day and night to keep up with all of this. It's hard to know if information you're looking at online is old or new or still current. And some of the stuff we're talking about here today might not be the same situation even a couple of days from now. So just look at good information like the Chamber of Commerce, like lawyers' websites. We're posting a lot and making sure that we're updating that. But just sort of a caution to go to as close to the horse's mouth as you can for this stuff to make sure you're getting accurate information when you're making decisions.
Thank you to our panelists, again, Mandie LaMontagne of the Intueri Group and Sara Forte of Forte Law Group. Thank you so much for your time on this afternoon's town hall. And there will be, as I mentioned, many more on topics related to human resources, but also forthcoming is a town hall on government funding supports. In about 2 weeks, there's going to be way more announcements. And we do have both provincial and federal government representatives that will be participating in our town hall. So again, check out businessinsurrey.com. A recording of this will be sent to you after the session, as well as a post-meeting survey. And ladies and gentlemen, stay safe. Remember, we're all in this together to ensure that Surrey remains an opportunity city to support and sustain our business community.